Is it going to do it? Well, that slide's supposed to do something other than that, so you were supposed to be able to read it. What's that? That's up there, but there's supposed to be like little circles going up to, like there's a thought there. For some reason, it's not doing it right now. It did it at home. At any rate. No, I just checked. Well, I appreciate everyone being here. As Ian said, today is Mother's Day. So happy Mother's Day to all the women out here. How many of you whose mothers are still living had a chance to call and wish her happy birthday? I did that myself today, and I reminded her that I need to get back to my studies because I was teaching tonight. She goes, "Oh, well, since it's Mother's Day, you should just take a few minutes and have everybody share a great memory about your mother." And I said, "Well, Mom, if I did that, here's what I would share." And she said, "Oh, well, maybe that's not a good idea." So, at any rate, we've had a lot of good memories over the years, but thankful that I am able to still talk with her. I don't know if Esther was, there's so little room on this. Let me make some room here. I don't know if Esther was actually a mother or not. Nothing in the entire book of Esther that indicates whether she actually became a mother or not. She's not mentioned anywhere else in the Bible, but in this book that bears her name. And but I'd like to think that maybe she was. Let's set this over here for the moment. It's getting in the way of my notes. But perhaps it's appropriate that since she is a woman, that we are starting the study of Esther on this day, this Mother's Day. Only 2 books in the Bible that bear a woman's name, Esther, and what's the other? Ruth. Yeah, thank you. There we go. Where does Esther fit into the timeline of the 3 books that we've been studying, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther? This is a chart that I had in the introductory lesson a couple months back that shared with us that Esther is a third-person account of events involving Esther and her older cousin Mordecai. And there's no indication of the writer's identity that appears in the book. We mentioned at the beginning of our study of these 3 books that most scholars assume that Ezra is the writer of this book as well. One scholar noted that if you have your Bibles open to Esther, chapter 1 and verse 6, when they're describing some of the wealth and glory that Xerxes displayed during this period of time, the verse 6 says, "The garden had hangings of white and blue linen." And the scholar pointed out that the term for white literally means the white stuff. That sounds like a term a guy would use, right? So the author was suggesting that it wasn't really written by Esther, but actually by a male. And as I said, most scholars think it was Ezra. And the author obviously is very well versed in the Persian Empire and all of the things that went on, some of their laws and whatnot, as he's going to bring out a lot of this here in this book. But Esther, when you think of the order of the books that they were found in the Bible, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, one would just assume that Esther falls historically after Nehemiah, since it comes in that order, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. But she actually, the story about Esther is actually before Nehemiah returns to Judah to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. In fact, she's closer to the period of when Ezra finally returns to Judah to help with the completion of the temple itself. So hopefully that kind of helps put this in somewhat of a time frame of where all of the events in this book are taking place. It tells about the courageous attempt of Esther and Mordecai to head off a Persian official's plot to eradicate the Jewish race. This again is a chart that we used at the very beginning of this class. Without mentioning God, prayer, the law, the temple, Jerusalem, or anything overtly spiritual, the book of Esther teaches how the Lord remains sovereign over every nation, no matter how godless it may become. And it's also about how God uses his people of all economic, social statuses to accomplish his purposes. And that's one of the main things that I want us to take away from this study of Esther, because I've been trying to talk a little bit about leadership within the Lord's church and how Ezra was a leader. Nehemiah as well was a leader. We saw some of the qualities. And sometimes I think we get it in our heads that we have to be of a certain status before we can actually enter into the service of God. But when the book of Esther opens up, what was her status? Anyone know? What was that? She's an ordinary person. She's also an orphan. She's been raised by her cousin, an older cousin, Mordecai. She is, in essence, a nobody. Nobody really knows of her. She has no real significance until one day she is made queen of Persia. And we're going to be obviously taking a look at all this, but I want us to be thinking about this, that it doesn't matter who we are or what economic status we have, what social status we have. Anyone can step up to be a leader in God's church. Okay? All right. Let's start by pointing this out. I wanted to kind of bring this to our attention here. Esther 1, verse 1, the NIV version says that Xerxes ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Cush. The King James Version says Ahasuerus reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. So the first thing that I want to point out, and Janine mentioned this to me when I walked into the building, so we're going to be talking about a fellow with several names. And Xerxes and Ahasuerus are one and the same person. They sometimes are referred to as Xerxes and sometimes as Ahasuerus. But this verse also points out how large the kingdom of Persia had become. The NIV says from India to Cush. That may not mean a whole lot to us, since a lot of us may not know where Cush is, but how about the terms from India to Ethiopia? That might make a little more significance. If you look at a world map, we know where India is. How about Ethiopia? I have to admit, it took me a few minutes to find it. As a geography major, I am not. Yeah, it's in northern Africa. I took my kids to, two of my grandkids, to a bluegrass festival, and we stopped for a bathroom break at a Jack in the Box along the way in Lost Hills. Granddaughter had to use the restroom, so we all stretched our legs, walked in there, and they said, "Oh, there's the map," and there she's standing next to it and posing while my grandson takes a picture of her, and I'm going, "What's going on?" He goes, "Don't you remember?" I go, "No, I don't know what you're talking about." Well, a year prior, we had some other grandkids along with those two, and we had stopped at the same place to use the restroom, and it was a map that showed that Jack in the Box had stores in every state in the United States. And I said, "So what's the significance of that?" They said, "Well, when Caden was here, we asked him, 'Do you know all the names of states?' He goes, 'Yeah.' And they said, 'Really?' And he started naming every single, and they were just blown away that he could name all the states of the United States. Because they're not majors in geography, and neither am I. But perhaps this will give us a better idea of how enormous this kingdom was. The Medo-Persian Empire, around the time that Esther becomes queen, is an enormous kingdom. Okay? And the book opens up with Xerxes wanting to show off the vastness of the wealth that he has from this kingdom. Okay? So we're going to take a look at the book of Esther. And I didn't have a whole lot of time to make up some charts, so we're going to actually open our Bibles instead of reading it from the overhead and take a look at the text here and what it has to say. So if you have not opened your Bible up yet, please do so to Esther, the first chapter. It opens up, as I said, with Xerxes wanting to display his wealth. And for the sake of time, because we're going to have a lot to cover here, let's start at verse 4, where it says, "For a full 180 days he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. When these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days in the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people from the least to the greatest who were in the citadel of Susa. The garden had hangings of white and blue linen, fastened with cords of white linen and purple material to silver rings on marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on the mosaic pavement of the porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from the other. And the royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's liberality. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink with no restrictions, for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished." Okay, so he puts on this display for 180 days. That's 6 months to display the wealth, that this man has. If you came to my house and I'm going to show you my wealth, we might be 3 minutes. I don't know, 3, 4 minutes, and we're done. 6 months he puts on this display for everybody in this massive province or kingdom to come and see what he has acquired. Following the 6 months, he then puts on another party, if you please, for 7 days. And during the 7 days, he allows each guest to drink as much as they want with no restrictions. Whatever they want, they got. Verse 9 says, Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women. So, what does this tell us about the banquet or party that Xerxes is putting on? Who is it for? What was that? For the men, yes. He pointed out, or the text actually points out that, let's see, but we didn't read verse 3, that he had a banquet for all his nobles, officials, the military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and nobles and the provinces that were present. But what I want us to really see is that he's putting on a party for all men. Queen Vashti has her own banquet for the women, but he's doing it for just the men. And what's going on here? Every man can have as much that he wants to drink as he desires. What do you think that's going to lead to? Some trouble. Now, anytime you put men together for a long period of time and you include some drinking, well, for that matter, exclude the drinking. Anytime you have a bunch of men get together, you're bound to end up having troubles, okay? Because sometimes we're just dumb. We really are. We don't use our heads the way we should. And what do you think it is that they have been discussing during this 7 days and all the drinking that's been going on here? Based on the request that he's going to make, what do you think he's asking? Or what they're thinking about or discussing during this time? There we go. The beauty of their women. Who amongst all the provinces that made up this Medo-Persian Empire has the most beautiful women? And the more they're drinking, the more this idea becomes heightened. Okay? Queen Vashti is holding her own banquet for the women, but we're told in verse 10, on the 7th day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs to bring before him Queen Vashti wearing her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. Xerxes says, I'm going to settle this question once and for all. Send Vashti, or send word for Vashti and have her come, and we're going to prove it right now. But what is her response? No, absolutely. I will not do it. Was she wrong in replying with this response? What do you think? Or maybe a better question is, what do you think Xerxes really wants her to display? What kind of demonstration does he want her to put on? Some scholars have suggested that he literally wants her to come in wearing nothing but her crown to display her beauty before all these men. If you were asked to do that, would you? No. I see a few women. I'm glad to see you're shaking your head. No, I wouldn't do that. No, I don't think she's really wrong in saying no to this request. But keep in mind, this is the king that is requesting this. And in the society that they lived in, women did not say no. They did what they were told. So for her to react this way and say, or refuse to go in before all these men and display her beauty, she, Janine, I'm sorry. Yep.
That just seems to be his back.
Yeah.
I get what I want.
Yeah. And it seems from the reading of the text that Vashti is just another possession for him. It may have been wrong in the sense of the Persian law to say no to the king, but morally, she made the right choice. I will not do that. What was his reaction? Did his pride get a little hurt? Oh, yeah, it did. He got very upset. Let's see here. In the last phrase in verse 12, the king became furious and burned with anger. So he held a meeting and asked his nobles and others what should be done about this. What was their reply? Anyone? Yeah, they're to replace her. They said that what she did, in their eyes, what she did was wrong. She should not have refused the king, and so he needed to remove her, depose her immediately. And he did. And they also sent out a decree. And verse 19, let it be written in the laws of Persian media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. Also let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. And when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all his vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands, from the least to the greatest. And the kings and the nobles were pleased with this advice. And so he dispatched messengers to get the word out. Vashti is out. All right, we come to chapter 2, and Esther becomes queen. Verse 1 of chapter 2 says, later when King Xerxes' fury had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed about her. And so the king's attendants proposed that a search be made throughout all the kingdom to collect or gather all of the beautiful women so he can choose a new queen. All he's really concerned about is the outward appearance. But Esther is one of a number of women that have been gathered throughout all of this empire to be paraded before the king. But they had to go through some beauty treatments first. Anyone know what that was? How long it was? I heard someone. I could hear voices, but I can't make it out. So please speak up, please. 1 year, yes. 1 year of beauty treatments. Okay. Let's see, verse. And let me find the verse here. Is it? Yes, okay, thank you. That's actually what I was looking for. Verse 12 and 13 says, before a young woman's turn came into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. And this is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given to her, with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening, she would go there, and in the morning return to another part of the harem to the care of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name. Well, the time finally came for Esther to be called. She took what the eunuch had suggested, and verse 15 says, Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her when she was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence in the 10th month of the month of Tebeth in the 7th year of his reign. And the king was attracted to Esther more than any other woman, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberality. All right, so through these events, Esther then becomes the queen over this massive empire. Okay? Whose care had she been in prior to being called to the king's palace? Her cousin Mordecai. And Mordecai is going to continue to watch out and care for her, look out for her, even while she is now in this high position. And so every day we're told that he goes to the gates and he checks up on her, finds out how she's doing and whatnot, even after she becomes queen. Okay? In chapter 2, verses 19 through 23, while Mordecai continues to do this, he learns of a conspiracy of 2 individuals that have it in for King Xerxes. So what does he do about this? What was that? Okay, he tells Esther about it. And so Esther then, in turn, goes to the king and tells him what these 2 men are planning and gives Mordecai the credit for the warning. So the king sets out an investigation, finds out that the accusations are true, and what happens to these 2 men? Yeah, he has these 2 men impaled, and the threat is now taken care of. All right. With that, we're then told about a man named Haman, who the king honors, gives him a position of honor higher than any of all the other nobles. This is chapter 3 and verse 1. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him, but Mordecai would not kneel down nor pay him honor. Why wouldn't he kneel down and give him honor? The king gave him this position. Maybe in answering that question, we need to ask this question: who is Haman? What's that?
Was he an Amalekite?
Yes, he was actually a direct descendant of Agag, the king of the Amalekites. You remember the story of Saul, who was told by God through the prophet Samuel to go in and utterly destroy the Amalekites. Did he do it? He didn't fully obey the Lord's command. And Haman is a survivor of that. So there is perhaps the fact that he remembers this story of what happened to his descendants when the Israelites, under Saul's leadership, attacked the Amalekites and pretty much closely wiped them out. In, I don't remember the text, Exodus, the 17th chapter, verses 14 through 16. It points out that the Amalekites were an enemy of the Lord from generation to generation. There was this constant battle between the Amalekites and Israel, generation after generation, year after year after year. Perhaps that helps explain why Mordecai would not bow down to this man. When it was noticed that he would not bow down to him, when everybody else would bow down and give him honor, Mordecai would not. Some questioned him why he wouldn't do it. Anyone read the text and know what his response was? Why? What his answer was? Why he would not bow down? His answer was simply, because I'm a Jew. Maybe that gives us a clue as to he knows who this guy is. He knows his descendants. And he says, I absolutely refuse to bow down to this enemy of the Lord. But Haman finds out about Mordecai. And is furious that Mordecai will not bow down and honor him. So he not only wants to kill Mordecai, his plot is to kill all the Jews. So he goes before the king and he tells him a story about a people that are different from everybody else. They don't really honor you. They don't really serve you. And you really don't need people like this in your kingdom. I've got a plan. I'm going to wipe them out. What do you think? He even offered him up some silver. Anyone know how much? Look at my notes. 10,000 talents of silver. Verse 9. What does your footnote say how much 10,000 talents is? $375 tons of silver. That equates to 750,000 pounds of silver that he's offering to the king to give him if he'll let him wipe out all these Jews. King says, keep your silver. Go ahead and do it. Gives him a signet ring to be able to send word out throughout the entire province of this Medo-Persian Empire. They cast lots, and the lots fell on the 12th month of the year. It was in the first month of the year that Haman approached the king with this plan. So they had 12 months to get the word out, to plan and purpose that all the Jews would be wiped out in one day. But Mordecai finds out about it. And what do you think he's going to do about it? He's going to convince Esther that she needs to do something about this. If there's anyone that's in a position to stop this evil plan, it's Esther. Because she has the ability to approach the king and convince him otherwise. So we come to chapter 4, and he goes to the gate in sackcloth and ashes and mourns over the news of what's supposed to take place in 12 months. Word is brought to Esther of what he's doing. She tried to get a change of clothes to him and try to cheer him up, and he said, no, I'm not going to change. So she then inquires, what's troubling you? And he sends word back to her of Haman's plan. He even provided a copy of one of the scripts that was sent out to other parts of the land as evidence that this was Haman's plan. And what is the famous quote that Mordecai puts to her to convince her, you need to do something about this?
Been here for such a time as this.
Who knows that you have been put here for such a time as this? Yes. You ever found yourself in a situation where something needed to be done and you're asking yourself, well, who else but me? If you recall some of the words that Blake shared with us this morning in telling us why he wants to serve, he pretty much raised that same question. Well, who else but me? We need to stop and reflect at our lives, I think, at times, and really ask ourselves a question when a need arises. Maybe that's why I'm here. We don't see or we don't hear God speaking directly to us, but perhaps we see the handiwork of God, like Mordecai did, in raising this girl, this orphan girl, to a position of queen over all of Persia for just this very purpose. What does Esther decide to do? She's going to go with the plan, yes. Okay. In verse 15 of chapter 4, the Bible says, Esther then sent a reply to Mordecai, go and gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. If I perish, I perish. She's willing to accept the consequences. And of course, her reference is to the fact that no one was allowed to approach the king without an invitation unless the king extended his scepter to them. And if they didn't, or if he didn't, it was off with their head. She knew this. She understood the risk that she was taking. This wasn't the kind of relationship between a husband and wife that we are perhaps used to today. Susan doesn't have to worry about whether I'm going to behead her if she wants to come and ask me a question. That's just nowhere near that kind of relationship between Xerxes and Esther. It's been 30 days since she has seen him or been in his presence. She has no idea how he's going to react. But she says, I'm going to go ahead and do this. Who else will do this? If not me, then who? So next week, as we get into this, we're going to see what she does when she approaches the king and how she carefully structures the situation to to change the king's mind regarding this whole situation. Any other comments or thoughts before we wrap the class up? Yes, Mitch? Yeah, very good point. Anything else? All right, I appreciate your attention tonight. And next week, as I said, we'll get into when she actually approaches the king about this whole situation. Thank you.